An elderly Doris Reed purchased a home from Robert King. Neither King nor the real estate agent told Doris that a woman and her 4 children were brutally murdered in the home 10 years earlier. One day shortly after moving in, Doris was conversing with her neighbor. The neighbor brought up the terrible murders that happened a decade ago. Doris was stunned. And after she found out that the seller and his real estate agent knew about the murders but never informed her, she felt wronged and betrayed. Had she known about the horrors that took place in the home, she wouldn't have purchased the property at all. She contacted an attorney and filed suit. The trial court dismissed her lawsuit. They reasoned that the murder was a psychological stigma that didn't rise to the level of a material defect that needed to be disclosed. Determined to have her day in court, Doris appealed the dismissal. The higher court noted that this was the first instance of a case involving a seller not disclosing murders in the home. The court went on, noting that murders are a rare enough occurrence that buyers shouldn't be charged with the obligation of discovering if they occurred in the home. But where the court changed the legal landscape on home disclosures in California was its ruling that if information known to only the seller has a significant and measurable effect on market value, and the seller is aware of this effect, the duty to disclose should have nothing to do with the type of information it is. The court held that if the buyer can objectively prove in court that the murder has a significant effect on market value, she should be entitled to a favorable judgment. The court reinstated the lawsuit, and she had a chance to prove her case. Before Doris could prove her economic damages, the parties settled. Several years later, the California legislature enacted a statute requiring disclosure of any death that occurred on a seller's property within 3 years of the purchase.
All right, welcome back. So, murder houses. Death has always been something that is much more accepted in the house. We have terminal illnesses, we have people passing away in their sleep. In fact, the old Victorian homes, the 1800s, they used to have coffin corners. They used to have specific issues in stairwells where they could get coffins out of the house, basically, because dying in your home was something that was just always part of the community, society, home ownership. It's what happened. But over time, we have become more and more attenuated from that issue. Death now happens in hospitals. It now happens in nursing homes. It now happens in a lot of other places more so than our homes. So we, in modern society, get a little freaked out sometimes at this issue that, people can die in their homes and then we move in and take it over. Murder is a whole new flavor of death in the house, right? Because it is happening in a much more violent and gruesome way. And we don't want to necessarily live in a place where such a horrible event happened, especially like in the Reed case, where she moves in and finds out that this wasn't just a murder, it was a few murders, and it involved kids. So how would you feel? You move into a home and you find out that a family was murdered there. Is that something that you would want to know before you bought the house? Well, for Miss Reed, it was, right? And so she sued. But the facts of the case, keep in mind, are that she did not discover this until several years after she moved in. So she was going about her business and everything was fine. It wasn't even on radar, no awareness whatsoever. And then one day, her and the neighbors start talking and she finds out. So does the length of time change your mind at all? What if you moved into your house and after 10 years of everything being normal, you find out what happened? Find out that a murder happened in your house. Would that still bother you even though it's been 10 years since you bought it? It's a great question, in my opinion, because it really begs to figure out, does the span of time dilute the intensity of our negative feelings about the situation? And for a lot of people, it probably would. For Miss Reed, it did not. So, 1983, the court held in this case that information about murders did constitute a material fact that needed to be disclosed. And specifically, the court almost instructed the lower court, the trial court, that if she could prove economic damages, if she could prove a loss of value because of the knowledge of the murders now, then she is entitled to victory in court. So, pretty strong concept there. Not only do we have a California court saying you have to disclose murders, but also if you can prove your economic damages because of that fact, then you're entitled to victory. So, do you agree with this? Again, nothing is physically wrong with the home. In fact, everything's been cleaned up or renovated, changed, and this happened a long time ago, 10 years before she bought it. And now she's entitled to victory if she can prove economic loss. That's almost a tall order, right? Because the market swings after 10 years so many times, and now it's in a completely different spot than the market was when she bought the home. Can she really prove economic damages now? Just to give you an end to the story, she settled with the prior owners here, so we really don't know if she could have proven it or not. The lawsuit was settled. But this case is precedent, and it was a factor in the California legislature then enacting law a little while later to say you must disclose these kind of issues, deaths and murders and suicides, in a home within the last 3 years before the buyer purchases the home. So if the buyer goes in and tenders an offer and it gets accepted, the seller's got to disclose within the last 3 years at that time if there was a death, homicide, or suicide. So it's interesting that the legislature actually put a cap on this. It wasn't indefinite, any death that happened or any murder that happened. It was only those within the last 3 years of the transaction date. And there are some other states out there that have a similar model where disclosure is mandatory within a certain, as if a death happened within a certain time period. Others, not so much. It's only upon being asked. If the seller is asked about a death, only then they need to disclose it. But some states, like California, a time period. So when you analyze and research murder homes, you'll find a report where, this is recent data, on average, homes that have been affected by a murder take 45% longer to sell than homes that didn't. And on average, they have a 3% loss in value. So with that data in mind, that begs the question, because it takes longer to sell now, and you've got a drop in value, at least 3%, does a murder home now constitute a material fact for disclosure? In fact, that was really the crux of the Reed court, where they said to Miss Reed, okay, it is a material fact, but you're only going to win if you can prove your damages, right? A loss of value. And the court speculated that she could. The court speculated that because murder will drop the value, that is the material fact. That makes it a material fact. But now, in order to win, you got to prove how much, right? So it's interesting to note here that the Reed court and other courts as well have held that the murder itself is a material fact because it will negatively affect value. And now we have data that confirms that. In 2002, here's another side story. In 2002, an intruder broke into a Maryland home, shot and killed a 9-year-old girl and her father. 11 months later, the home was bought by a new buyer who was completely unaware of the murders. When he found out, he fought to rescind the transaction, but the efforts failed. And in 2010, an intruder broke into the house and killed him in his bedroom. That property, that happened in Maryland, I believe, Maryland, that property sold $200,000 under value. So we are seeing this happen all the time. you'll find it in the news. In fact, if you go Google murder house or disclosure of murder house, you'll find all of these kinds of stories, and you will see that when they went to resell the home, the vast majority of them had a hard time obtaining value, had to sell it under value. So it's almost confirmed by the reality of the situation, by data itself. The study that I cited earlier was actually done by some finance professors out of Ohio. The data confirms and reality confirms murder homes do actually have an effect on value. And if they have an effect on value, should they be a material fact then? The courts usually say yes to this, but yet it's not a requirement in a lot of states. We'll see that in the next case. So what do you think? Murders in a home, should they be disclosed? In California, yes, under Reed v. King and now legislative law, within 3 years of the transaction, must disclose. Same with several other states. So do you agree with that? It's a great question that's going to take us into the next case where a very similar issue happened, but the court held the other way. So let's go in and find out why that court went opposite of California.